Hello, everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. My name is Chris, a backpacker who is always on the hunt for cheap Airbnbs in remote places to enjoy the tranquility of nature. That weekend, I found a small cabin deep in the redwood forest for an almost unbelievable price of only $15 a night and had a 4.5-star rating. I couldn't believe my luck. I booked 2 nights without thinking twice. When I arrived, it was dusk. The forest was dyed red. The towering trees cast giant shadows down the dirt road leading to the house. The initial feeling was strange, not because of the scenery, but because the air was thicker and colder than the surrounding areas, as if this house was cut off from the outside world. The old 2-story cabin with peeling paint, opaque windows, and a mossy roof. There was a small sign with the name of the house, Hollow Pines, handwritten in white chalk on a grey wooden board. I stepped onto the wooden porch. Each step made a long creaking sound like a groan from my heart. When I opened the door, the smell of mold and rotten wood hit me like an unpleasant wave. I turned on the lights, but there was only a pale yellow bulb flickering in the corner of the house, reflecting my distorted image in the large mirror. Next to the stairs, the interior was vintage style with old tables and chairs, dusty bookshelves and black and white photos hanging everywhere, mostly portraits of people I didn't recognize. Dragged my suitcase up to the bedroom upstairs. On both sides of the stairs were paintings of mountain and forest landscapes, but one made me stop. It was a painting of a ritual with a circle drawn in blood, with 5 people in black robes kneeling inside. They had no faces, just silhouettes, but their hands were drawn in great detail with long, curved nails. I felt a chill, but tried to reassure myself that it was just dark art. The bedroom was simple, with a double bed with silver grey sheets and a window overlooking the forest. I put my luggage down and opened the window to get some fresh air, but somehow the wind from outside blew in, carrying a very faint, fishy smell like iron rust. I shrugged, thinking it must be the smell of rotting moss. Underground that night, I sat in the living room, reading a book, the sound of rain pattering on the roof I found pleasant and relaxing, but only for a moment, because the sound of rain could not cover up another strange sound coming from downstairs. Was a soft tapping sound 3 times in a row, as if someone was tapping on the floor from underground. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that old wooden houses often make noise, but then the ceiling light suddenly went out, leaving only a faint light from the nightlight. I took out my phone and turned on the flashlight and went downstairs to check everything was still quiet, but the atmosphere seemed more stuffy than before. Down in the basement, I discovered a small door hidden behind a bookcase that seemed like no one had opened it. For a long time, I curiously pulled it open after taking a deep breath. I walked down the damp stone steps. The stench was getting heavier and heavier. In the dim light of the flashlight, I saw on the ground red paint marks that had faded over time, forming a large circle with strange, unreadable symbols. I saw my heart. I tightened my grip in fear. In the middle of the circle was something covered in black cloth. I had not yet reached it when a sound rang out behind me, like a whisper in a language I had never heard. I turned around, but there was no one there. Just a cold breath from somewhere brushed against the back of my neck, making my skin crawly. Immediately ran upstairs and locked the basement door and gasped for breath. I couldn't sleep. That night, I felt like someone was watching me from the darkness, from the pictures, from the mirror, or even from under the floor. That's when I realized this cheap vacation wasn't as simple as I thought, and I wasn't sure I would get out of here. safely watch the next episode. Hollow Pines has never been a place to rest. I stayed up all night. The sound of the wind whistling through the cracks of the door, mixed with the sound of the rain falling, made all my senses tense. I just lay there, eyes glued to the ceiling, ears trying to listen to every little sound, but what kept me from falling asleep was not the sound but the feeling. There was something present in this house, something invisible but always following me every step and every breath. Around 3 in the morning, I decided to go down to the kitchen. To get water, every step on the stairs echoed throughout the dark house, with only the faint light from the phone to guide the way. I put my hand on the switch, but the light wouldn't turn on, only a dry clicking sound. I shivered as I walked into the kitchen. In the dark, I poured water from the faucet, and when I raised my head to look at the mirror by the sink, I froze. On the mirror, there was a faint handprint, stretching as if someone had just touched it from the inside. But what was more horrifying was the silhouette behind me, a tall, thin figure standing motionless. I turned around, but there was nothing, just an empty kitchen and a weak flashlight. The chili was shaking slightly in my Hondi. Wiped the mirror with my sleeve, thinking I was seeing things, but the handprint didn't disappear. It was still clearly printed. Opaque, but real, as if engraved on the glass. I went back to the living room, but didn't dare turn off the phone light. I lay on the sofa, my eyes were still glued to every corner of the room. A small click sounded from the direction of the hallway. I sat up and walked back to see the bathroom door slowly opening, even though I was sure I had closed it before going to bed. It was dark inside, but I heard a soft whisper, like someone was talking in a strange language. The tone repeated like an ancient chant. I walked closer. My heart was pounding like a drum. My breathing was rapid. Took the phone into the bathroom to shine the light on a large mirror above the sink, and I was stunned again. In the mirror was my own image, but my face was smiling, a sinister smirk, while the real me was panicking, not understanding what was happening. I screamed and fell backwards. The phone fell to the floor and broke when I got up and looked back. Mirror, everything was normal, nothing was different. The reflection was just me with a pale face and wide open eyes, lifeless. I picked up the phone, tried to turn it on, but it didn't work. The phone was completely dead. I felt like I was cut off from the outside world, completely isolated in this dark Foresti. Closed the bathroom door, then ran upstairs, locked the bedroom door, and sat against the bed, not daring to sleep. Outside the window, the rain was still falling, but the whispering didn't stop this time. It seemed to be right behind my door. I pressed my ear to the door and almost screamed when I heard someone whispering my name, Chris. Each word, each breath seemed to penetrate my eardrums. I stepped back. My heart felt like it was squeezing. I tried to tell myself this was a dream, a hallucination, due to fatigue, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. There was something wrong with this house, a horrible secret buried beneath the rotten wood and old painting. The blood rituals I saw in the basement might not just be ruins, but a sign of something still going on. That night was a long night, the most in my life. I just sat there waiting for the first light, but it was like the sky never brightened outside. It was still pitch black, and the house was still whispering something to itself or to spirits I couldn't see. When I fell asleep from exhaustion, I dreamed I was standing in the middle of a ritual circle, surrounded by figures in black robes, their hands touching me, their mouths muttering curses in a strange language. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but my body couldn't move. When I woke up, my sweat was drenched, my heart was still pounding. I knew I needed to leave this place as soon as possible, but my intuition told me this house wouldn't let me escape. Isley watched the next episode of the untitled painting and the blood mark in the bedroom. I woke up from a dreamless sleep. My whole body was exhausted. The air in the room was unusually cold, even though I had closed all the windows and doors tightly. I got out of bed and pulled the curtains, but it was still dark, as if there had never been a dawn. The tree branches outside were swaying gently in the wind. The dense fog made the scene even more eerie. I went downstairs to check my phone, but it still wouldn't turn on. The battery was completely dead. I had no way to contact the outside world. There was no signal, no Wi-Fi, no connection at all. I went back to my room and started to notice the details I had overlooked since. Yesterday, the painting hanging above the head of the bed started to bother me. I had only glanced at it before and thought it was a landscape painting, but now that I looked closely, something was wrong. The dim light from the window shone directly on the paint, making me see small wrinkles in the corner of the painting. I approached and gently pulled up the edge of the canvas and discovered that underneath the current layer of painting was another layer with darker colors. I tried to gently peel off the top layer of paint out, and when the top part peeled off the surface, I froze. Behind was a completely different painting that was both haunting and terrifying. It depicted a room identical to the one I was standing in, but with 5 more people in black cloaks, kneeling around a circle with blood symbols, and in the middle of the circle was a person lying motionless with his hands. Tied with red rope, felt a chill down my spine. The painting not only resembled the room but also my current arrangement. The bed, the dresser, the table lamp, everything matched almost perfectly, as if the person who painted this painting had sat in the exact spot I was standing. I backed away and crouched down on the floor, my heart pounding. I looked under the bed and found something that looked like it was drawn in red ink on the wooden floor. I used my phone to look at it and realized it wasn't ink, but dried blood. The symbols were curved in circles, very similar to the painting I had just seen. I tried to take a picture, but my phone still wouldn't work. I used a towel to try to wipe the blood and realized it was still stuck very tightly to the wood, as if has been absorbed over the years. I even smelled a faint, fishy smell when I brought my nose closer. While I was observing more closely, a strong wind hit the window, making me startled. I turned around reflexively and saw in the mirror next to the bed a silhouette standing behind me. I turned around, but saw nothing, no one, just a cold, empty space. Started to feel dizzy, not sure if it was from lack of sleep or from the thick air in the room. All my senses warned me to leave this place immediately, but inside me there was also something urging me to investigate deeper, as if this house would not allow me to leave without discovering all its secrets. I left the bedroom and wandered in the dark hallway. I tried opening each door to see if there was anything else that had not been discovered. One of the doors on the second floor led to a small, narrow room with no windows, only a table and an old wooden chair. In the middle of the room on the table was a thick, rotten, leather-bound book. The spine was torn, revealing yellowed pages with symbols strange and drawings of the spirits summoning ritual. I didn't dare touch the book, but just looking at it was enough to make my skin crawl. I turned around to leave the room, but found that the door had been slammed shut for a long time. I didn't hear any noise or wind, so why was the door closed? I quickly walked to open the door, but the handle wouldn't turn, as if someone was holding it from the outside. I banged on the door and called out loudly, but only heard the echo of my own voice. After a few seconds, the door suddenly opened and no one was there. The hallway was completely empty. I went back to the bedroom to pack my things, but the feeling that something was watching made me lose my composure, and every action became clumsy. I kept looking over my shoulder and finally decided to leave this house as soon as it was light. But when I went out to check the main door, it was locked from the outside. I was locked in the very place I had booked for vacation. Watch the next episode of Sounds in the Walls and the Words That Appeared at Midnight. I checked all the windows and doors, but just as I feared, all the exits were locked from the outside, with no way to escape. I was trapped in the house that I thought was my temporary shelter, now like a sealed box with no way out. I tried to stay calm and went upstairs to my bedroom and locked the door, but my mind couldn't be quiet for even a second. The feeling of being watched became clearer by the minute, as if some invisible eyes were looking through my skin. I lay down on the bed and pulled the covers up, but before I could close my eyes, a small sound rang out from behind the wallet. It wasn't the sound of wind or the creaking of a wooden house, but it was a steady, three-time knock from inside the wall at the head of the bed. I held my breath and listened, thinking I was paranoid, but it continued again and again each time. The knocks followed a strange rhythm, like a signal code. I moved closer and pressed my ear to the wall and was shocked to hear a very small whisper of someone saying something on the other side of the wall, but I couldn't understand. I followed the sound around room and realized it moved with me. Step by step, as if something was moving inside the old wooden walls. I banged my hand on the wall and screamed, but there was no response, only absolute silence. Then suddenly everything stopped, no more sound, as if it had never happened. I went back to bed, trying to calm myself and close my eyes, but less than 5 minutes later, I heard the sound of water dripping from the bathroom. Even though I was sure no one was using the faucet, I was forced to go in and check. When I turned on the bathroom light, the dim light shone on the steamy mirror. I was stunned to see the words slowly appearing, as if someone was writing with their fingertips from behind the glass gris. "Don't sleep." I stepped back, shaking, not understanding what was going on, then immediately reached out to wipe the mirror, but the words still didn't disappear, as if it wasn't written in steam but was part of the glass itself. I stared at the mirror, but the words were gone, only my reflection with blank eyes. I turned off the bathroom light, ran out into the hallway, and saw something even more horrifying. Under the wooden floor were wet footprints, one after another, from the bathroom running all the way to the stairs leading down to the basement. The bare footprints were small, like those of a child. I bent down to touch them and discovered that they were really cold water and could not evaporate as quickly as normal water. I hesitated, standing in front of the stairs, not knowing what to do now. Should I go down or stay? I was too tired but also too scared to sit still. I decided to follow the footprints, but brought a small fruit knife from the kitchen as a self-defense measure. Each step down to the basement seemed to stretch endlessly. The flashlight flickered because the battery was low, creating distorted shadows on the wall. When I got there was no one, but the wet footprints disappeared in the middle of the circle of blood that had dried from the last time. I walked closer, and suddenly my phone lit up for no reason. The screen showed a strange line of text. I didn't type a command that automatically appeared. "Stay until the last light." I threw my phone in panic and turned around and ran upstairs. But as soon as I reached the first step, the basement lights, suddenly I saw nothing but darkness and coldness wrapped around my neck, like something was clinging to me. I ran up, slamming the door shut and leaning against it, panting. My heart was pounding like it was going to jump out of my chest. I couldn't understand what was happening, but part of me believed I was being tested or imprisoned by some force that didn't belong to this world. This house wasn't just a place where rituals were held, it was also a gatekeeping, something inside that I shouldn't wake up. I huddled in the corner of the room, holding my head, hoping for morning to come quickly, but time seemed to stand still outside. It was still endless night, and the noises and the walls started again, this time slower, deeper, like someone was trying to crawl out of the cramped space behind the rotten woodwatch. The next episode of The Old Diary and the Secret of the Previous Tenant. After a sleepless night, I decided to search the entire house again, in the hope of finding something that would help me escape this place, or at least help me understand what the hell was going on. I went back to the small room where I had found The ritual book, but this time I pulled up the old carpet on the floor and found a loose wooden board. I used a knife to gently pry it open, and underneath was a small niche that contained a notebook that had rotted over time. It was an old leather-bound diary with peeling edges and yellowed pages. I gently opened it. The scribbled writing in black ink was blurred but still legible. The diary belonged to a man named Daniel who had rented this house before me about 2 years ago. The first line read, "I don't know if I will survive to write the last page, but if anyone finds this notebook, please leave immediately." I continued reading, and what I discovered made my blood run cold. Daniel recounted experiences that were almost identical to mine. The sound in the mirror, wall writing shadow in the night, and the whole basement with the blood ritual circle. He said he was haunted from the first night, and every night after that, things got worse. Daniel described being completely disconnected from the outside world. The phone had no signal. No electronic devices were short-circuited or made strange noises. He recounted that he once dug behind the house and discovered an old burial pit with human bones and some pieces of black robes inside. He did not dare to report to the police because every time he tried to leave, he had an unusual accident, like his car broke down, a tree fell on the road, or he got lost in the woods. Reading this far, I realized I was not alone, but at the same time, I felt the door to escape was closing tighter and tighter. Daniel wrote about being tormented by recurring dreams in which he was always standing in the middle of a circle and black-cloaked figures kept getting closer and closer. Step by step, he could not scream, could not move, could only wait for something to come closer. The last page of the diary made me shiver, because there was no text, only a scribbled circle, and in the middle was a person lying motionless, exactly like what I saw in the picture. And under the bed, I suddenly realized that the drawing was not a description, but Daniel's last warning. I put the notebook down and looked around the room. The space was so quiet that I could hear my heart beating, but that silence did not last long, because right behind me there was a creaking sound, like someone was pulling a chair. I turned back to the old chair in the middle of the room that was slowly turning towards me, even though no one had touched it. Was startled and ran out of the room and closed the door, but when my hand was still holding the doorknob, from the other side came 3 very light but regular knocks, exactly like the sound I had heard from the wall. I could not stand it anymore. I ran downstairs to find an exit, hoping that there was a door that was not locked, but everything was still locked tightly as before. I thought about breaking the window, but the wooden frame was rotten and the glass was too thick. I had nothing hard enough to break. I went back to the living room, where the light from the window shone through the torn curtain, and I noticed on the table there was another object that I had never seen before, a small wooden box with a lock. I didn't know where it came from, and I didn't remember seeing it. Picked it up and shook it lightly. I heard a metallic sound inside, but there was no key to open it. I decided to keep it. Maybe inside was a clue. I sat down on the sofa, and for the first time in hours, I felt fear turning into panic. I could no longer control my thoughts. Everything seemed to be swirling together. Dreams, symbols of blood, whispers, and now the last words of a previous tenant. I leaned back, holding my head, my eyes closed, and hoping that when I opened my eyes, it would all be just a dream. But deep down, I knew this was not a dream, and certainly not a coincidence. I had entered an old story that was repeating itself in a slow, cruel, and hopeless way. Watch the next episode of The Mysterious Box and the Letter Hidden Behind the Wall. I sat there in a daze with the wooden box in my hand, feeling the coldness from the rotten wood surface seeping into my skin, as if it held something that was not allowed to be revealed. I took a fruit knife from the kitchen and gently pried open the lock. After a few tries, the lid of the box opened with a small sound, and inside was a scene that left me speechless. Inside the box were three main objects: a half-burnt black candle, a scroll tied with a red thread, and a circular pendant, engraved with the same symbol as the ritual circle in the basement. I pulled out the scroll, my hands shaking, then untied the thread to open it. It was a hand-drawn diagram of the house's layout, accompanied by symbols and notes in a smudged red ink that had some parts smeared like blood. Each room was marked, and the scariest part was that right behind my bedroom wall there was a note in English: "Stay hidden behind the prayer wall." I didn't understand the meaning, but I clearly felt that it was a place to hide something bad. I brought the diagram back to my bedroom and checked the marked wall. The weak flashlight shined on the old paint. I used the handle of a knife to tap the wall and noticed a spot that was darker than the rest. I used the knife to lightly carve and discovered a gap behind the wood. After a while of prying the loose wood, I found a small hole large enough to hide something inside, and indeed, there was a piece of paper carefully rolled up and tucked into the wood crack. I took it out and opened it gently and discovered it was a handwritten letter. The paper was rotten, but the words were still legible. I read each line and each word with trembling hands, and a tingling sensation ran down my spine. The letter was written by a woman named Elise, who was believed to be the wife of the previous homeowner. The content of the letter was a horrifying confession. Elise said that her husband was a member of a secret cult that worshipped something called the Nameless One, an ancient entity that was said to live between two worlds and could grant wishes if the blood ritual was performed properly. She said that he held bloody prayers in this very house with the participation of 4 other people, each representing a slightly different element of blood and bone, breath and darkness, after years of living in the haunting. Elise tried to burn the ritual artifacts, but was discovered by her husband. He locked her in the upstairs bedroom and performed the final ritual, but she managed to hide this letter in the wall in the hope that someone would read it and end the cycle of evil that had lasted for generations. Reading this far, I held the letter tightly, unable to believe what I had just received. But a part of me felt that everything was connected. Every symbol, every whisper, every nightmare had a reason, and that this house was not just haunted, it was a place of worship for something that existed somewhere between this world and the next. I put the letter in my backpack and went back downstairs to check the pendant again. The symbol on it started to make me dizzy, as if looking at it for too long would make me dizzy. I wrapped it in a towel and put it deep in the bottom of my backpack, intending to take it with me when I left this place. If I had the chance that night, I did not dare to sleep. I locked all the doors and sat huddled on the bed. Every little noise also makes me startled. When the clock shows 2 a.m., a cold breeze passes by and all the lights go out. I hear slow footsteps from the hallway and clearly feel someone standing outside the bedroom door. My hands are shaking so much I can't hold the knife. I don't dare to open the door, don't dare to make a sound, and then the familiar slow knock 3 times echoes as if it's coming from someone else's memory and not mine. The room is colder than ever, and I know something is coming. Watch the next episode. Blood ritual begins, and the shadow appears in dreams. I sat still in the dark room, not daring to make any sound. The slightest breath made me feel like I was being discovered. The 3-beat knock still echoed in my head, each one like a hammer hitting my mind. I held the small knife tightly in my hand, but knew clearly that if there was something outside this door, a knife could not save me. A moment later, everything fell silent again. The house seemed frozen in anticipation, but waiting for what I did not know. I sat there until the dim light of the morning gradually crept through the gaps in the curtains, but it did not bring any relief, but only a sign that a new bad day was about to begin. I fell asleep without knowing it, only knowing that when I opened my eyes, I was lying on the bed and the sun was high outside the window. But the first thing I realized was that there was something unusual on the floor, a thin layer of new dust covering it evenly. But in the middle of the floor were bare footprints, clearly imprinted in the dust, as if someone had walked around my bed while I was sleeping. I jumped up, my whole body covered in cold sweat, checked the door, but it was still locked from the inside. There was no one there. Signs of being broken into, I turned back to the table where I had left the pendant last night, but it was gone instead. There was a small streak of dried blood that extended to the painting on the wall. I approached and realized that the painting had been rotated a few degrees behind it. There was a small gap, just big enough to fit something. I tried to stay calm and went back to the living room to make coffee, but my hands were shaking so much I couldn't hold the cup. I decided to sit down and write down everything I was going through as a way to not go crazy. I wasn't sure if this was reality or if I had fallen into another dimension where all the rules were distorted. Night fell. I decided not to sleep. I locked all the windows so no light could get in, and turned on all the lights in the house, but at around 3 in the morning, all the lights went out at the same time. I felt a cold air running down my spine. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, and when I opened them, I saw a figure standing in the middle of the room. I couldn't see his face, just a tall, silent figure. I couldn't scream, I couldn't move, my body was frozen. Was that figure come forward and just stand there looking at me through the darkness, feeling like my mind is being pulled into its invisible eyes? In that moment, I hear whispers in an ancient language, familiar as if I have heard it before, even though I don't understand the meaning. When I wake up, still sitting in the chair, the light is back on, no one is around, but on the ceiling above me are black handprints, smeared as if someone has been crawling all over the ceiling all night. I get up, go into the bathroom, wash my face, and see on the mirror again the words, in dried blood, "You saw him now, you belong to him." I feel like every action of mine is leading to an inevitable end, as if I am no longer the one in control, but just a link in a prearranged ritual dream shadow. Blood symbol, all are pieces of something bigger that is slowly emerging, That night, I try to fight sleep, but I can't, and when I fall asleep, I dream. Again, I am standing in the basement in a ritual circle, surrounded by 5 cloaked figures, black, and a 6th person was stepping out of the darkness this time. I saw his face clearly, a blurry face, no eyes, no nose, just a wide open mouth. Without making a sound, he came closer to me and reached out to touch my forehead, and when his cold finger touched me, the whole world shook, and I woke up in the middle of a gasp. But in front of me was no longer a bedroom, but a real basement, and I was sitting in the middle of a ritual circle with 5 black candles burning around me. Watch the next episode of Saturday Night and the Blade in the Dark Corridor. I was shocked to realize that I was no longer in bed, but sitting in the middle of the basement. Everything was exactly like in the dream. The ritual circle of 5 black candles was burning, and the smell of burnt wax and old blood filled my nose, making me suffocate. I rushed out of the circle, but the basement space seemed endless. The light from the flashlight gradually dimmed, while the sound of bare feet lightly hitting the stone floor behind me grew closer and closer. I turned around, but saw nothing, only a long shadow on the wall, shaking slightly, as if breathing. I rushed up the stairs, but the steps seemed to be lengthening, each step becoming heavy, as if I was stepping in mud. When I reached the ground floor door and threw it open, the whole house was pitch black with no light left. I ran into the living room to find the light switch, but none of it worked, as if the electricity had been cut from the inside. I groped through the darkness, trying to find the phone, but it was still silent, without a single ray of light. I only had a small knife left in my hand, and felt like something was crawling behind me. I walked out the hallway leading to the kitchen, and saw it a long blade lying in the middle of the hallway, reflecting the light from a flashing light above. I went closer and sat down, and when I was about to pick up the blade, I heard heavy footsteps from the end of the hallway. I looked up and saw a figure standing motionless, but there was no face, just a dark void above the head. I stood up and retreated, but the figure did not move. I grabbed the knife and ran towards the stairs to the upper floor, but when I just stepped on the first step, the lights on the entire first floor suddenly turned on for a second, and in that moment, I saw a figure right behind me, holding something long and sharp. I rushed up the stairs, ran into the room, and locked the door. My whole body was shaking and sweating like a shower despite the cold air. I turned towards the mirror to calm myself and found a new line of words appearing on the glass. "Welcome to the seventh night." Blood dripped from the edge of the mirror to the floor in long streaks. I realized today was the 7th night since I had set foot here, and Daniel's diary also mentioned that Saturday night was the time when the ritual was completed, where the dark entity was fully summoned. I sat down on the floor, panting, and couldn't control the images that appeared in my head of the old rituals, people in blood and fire robes, and the screams of the sacrificed ones. I rummaged through my backpack and pulled out the pendant I had hidden and noticed it was heating up. I held it tightly and turned my eyes to the door, where the familiar 3-beat knock sounded again. This time, it didn't stop but turned into scratching sounds, like someone was trying to get through each layer of wood to get in. A moment of panic. I saw a faceless figure in the mirror approaching behind me, but when I turned around, I saw nothing. I screamed and hit the mirror, and blood splattered from my hand onto the glass, but the image in the mirror didn't change. The figure was still approaching, slowly, step by step, huddled in the corner of the room, clutching the knife and the pendant. I knew if I didn't do something tonight, I would never leave here again. I have no doubt the darkness in this house is real, and it is hungry and wants me. The last part of the ritual that Daniel escaped, but did not survive to tell. Watch the next episode of The Last Secret Chamber and the Door That Should Never Be Opened. I sat curled up in the corner of the room, blood still dripping from my hand from the wound. I had broken the mirror, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the numbness in my mind. I knew time was running out and this house was about to complete something horrifying. All the signs from the first night were leading to an ending I couldn't have foreseen. I looked at the broken mirror on the floor, where the blood I had just touched the glass began to spread, forming a blurry spiral, and in the middle was a symbol I had seen on a map hidden in the ritual box. A circle with 2 diagonal lines symbolizing the ritual door had been opened. I backed away and sat down on the floor, and for the first time admitted I was truly scared. I took out the pendant. It was still warm, as if something was alive inside it. I held it tightly in my hand and walked out of the room. The hallway was now longer than before, or maybe it was just the light from the hallway light, flickering constantly, creating a sense of space distortion. I walked to the end of the hallway, where before there was a blank wall, but now an old door appeared that I was sure I had never seen before. A dark wooden door with a rusty brass handle around the edge of the door, with dried blood symbols identical to the ones I saw in the basement. I approached and lightly touched the handle and felt electricity run down my spine from somewhere underground. I heard a faint whisper, like someone was reciting an ancient prayer in a deep voice echoing through the wood. Hesitated for a second, then turned the doorknob, but the door did not open. I tried again, this time pressing the pendant firmly against the central symbol, and a click sounded. The door slowly opened with a long, painful screech. Inside was a spiral staircase leading underground, where it was completely dark without a single light. I shined my flashlight down, but the light only illuminated a few steps before being swallowed by darkness. I walked slowly down, each step as if knocking on my heart. Each time it beat faster. As I reached the bottom, it was a circular room. The entire wall was covered in blood, ancient language writing, and strange symbols with no meaning. In the middle of the room is a stone pedestal, and on it is the ritual book that I saw before, now open, as if waiting for someone to continue reading. Dare not go closer, but also cannot turn back, as if there is an invisible force forcing me to move forward, step by step. When I touch the book, it opens another page, and the faint red light emitted from the characters makes the room hazy, like sleepwalking. I see images not from the present, but from the past, or another dimension, images of the ritual people tied up screaming, and a black soul is escaping from the stone pedestal. I jump back, but behind is the wall blocking the exit. Everything seems to collapse, then rebuild to the rhythm of the book from the middle of the room. A deep sound like a drum, and the shadow of the person from the symbols starts to move as if the wall is alive. I close my eyes and scream loudly, and when I open my eyes, I find myself standing at the door of the room, but now the door is closed and there is no handle outside. Try to open it, but in vain. Instead, the words appear in blood right away on the wood. No one came out after the ritual was chosen. I shivered and turned back to the hallway, but it had also changed now. There was only one path leading towards the bedroom. The light was dim, and a strange scent wafted in the air, like the smell of wilted flowers mixed with something strong, like metallic. Turned back to look one last time at the door where I just walked out, feeling that there was still some soul watching me from the darkness. I knew clearly I had just stepped one foot into the center of the ritual, and the next part was the scariest thing. Watch the next episode. The Book of Blood and the Unstoppable Summoning. I left the hallway in a state of confusion. The door behind me had disappeared, leaving only the empty wooden wall, as if it had never existed. While in my hand, I still held the pendant that was getting hotter by the second, as if it was in sync with the breathing of some living creature from another dimension. I walked down the hallway and saw that the house was no longer the same. Every door was closed, silent, no wind, no sound of insects, no sound other than the sound of my heart beating in my chest. I returned to the bedroom, where the light from the dim nightlight created long shadows across the ceiling and walls. But everything in the room had been moved. The position of the bed was turned sideways. The mirror fell and broke on the floor. The curtains were torn, as if someone had just rummaged through everything just to find an item. I turned around to see the ancient book that had appeared in the stone room, now lying in the middle of the bed, open with the page soaked in fresh blood that had not dried. I moved closer and realized that the blood was not mine, but there was a familiar feeling. Each line on the page seemed to move under my eyes. The ancient symbols wriggled like snakes, and I was forced to read aloud what was written. As if hypnotized by an invisible force, I spoke each ancient word loudly, making the room shake every time. The dark shadows in the corner of the wall began to shake, and the wind rose from inside the closed house. When I read the last sentence, the lights in the whole house suddenly went out. Everything fell into darkness, and a rumbling sound rang out from under the floor, like the wailing of hundreds of souls imprisoned in stone. The door of the room slowly closed and locked. I was locked in with the book and the cold darkness. I heard footsteps from downstairs, the slight screeching of wood and the scratching of each steppy held the small knife and the pendant tightly in my left hand, and sat huddled against the wall, waiting for something to come closer. But when the door opened, there was no one there, only the wind and the fishy smell wafted. By then, a tall, thin black shadow appeared in the broken mirror, and the image in it began to move like a creepy cartoon. Each frame was the scene of a person being taken in the ritual circle, and the face was blurred, blood pouring from the eyes and mouth. I turned away, not daring to look anymore, but in my head still echoed those images, as if engraved into my memory. Each scream, each sound of broken bones, and the chanting became clearer and clearer, no longer vague as before. I flipped the book back to close it and discovered that the last pages had disappeared. Instead, a small mirror was glued to the spine of the book. In the mirror was my image, but no eyes, just two deep black holes. I threw the book to the ground and retreated to the corner of the room, but the flashing lights came back on. All the symbols on the wall appeared clearly in red, and the whole room seemed to be engraved in blood. The drawings moved automatically. I heard a screeching laughter like a child's, and also the voices of adults echoing each word. I no longer knew if I was awake or had fallen into a deep nightmare with no way out. I rushed out of the room, but the hallway was no longer straight, but curved, like the intestines of a living creature, and in the middle of the way there was a door glowing with red fire. I knew the other side is the end, or the beginning of everything, but I also know if I don't step in, I will be stuck forever in the loop of this ritual. Watch the next episode, The Fire of the Soul. And the last face I saw. I walked through the burning door without feeling the heat, just the feeling of going through a layer of cold smoke. And when I opened my eyes, I found myself standing in the middle of a vaulted room with a high ceiling covered with characters drawn in fresh blood that had not dried yet. The light in the room did not come from a light bulb or a candle, but from a circle of red fire, swirling in the middle of the floor, emitting a buzzing sound like thousands of whispers converging in an ancient prayer. The air was thick with the smell of burning blood and charred flesh filling the room. I tried to turn around, but the door had disappeared, leaving only the cold and damp stone wall behind me. All the sounds from the outside world had also disappeared, leaving nothing but a pounding heartbeat and a soft moan like the wind that was echoing from all four directions. I saw a figure kneeling in the middle of the circle of fire, head bowed, body trembling as if enduring some kind of pain, hands tightly gripping the stone floor, blood flowing through the gaps between the fingers. The image was unclear, but I realized I had seen this figure in my dreams, not at times, and many times. I slowly approached each step, as if stepping on the layer of broken bones under the stone floor. When I was a few steps away from the circle, the fire suddenly flared up fiercely, and an invisible force pushed me back. I crawled up and saw a second soul appear in the smoke, a child about 10 years old with lifeless eyes, looking at me without blinking mouth, whispering meaningless words. I wanted to scream, but my throat was choked up. No sound could be made, only the sound of my heart beating stronger and stronger. The child's shadow gradually faded into the smoke, and in its place was another older face, deep without eyes. Just two dark holes and tightly pressed lips, blood flowing down both cheeks. That face gradually approached me, little by little, not walking but floating, as if being pulled by an invisible string. I tried to step back, but the space behind was closed by the wall. I turned my head to find another way, then saw the large mirror in the corner of the room. The mirror was not me, but the image of Daniel, the tenant, in front of the face, panicked mouth, constantly repeating, "Don't let it touch my heart. Don't let it touch my heart. Don't let it touch my heart." Turned around, and the black shadow was right In front of me, its hand reached out and I felt a cold current go through my chest. I fell to the floor, my whole body trembled as if paralyzed. My eyes blurred before I passed out. I saw a figure kneeling in the middle of the fire, slowly raising its head, and it was my face, but distorted and bleeding with empty eyes, as if it had died long ago. Woke up on the floor, but now there was no more firing, just a dark, empty room with no light, no exit. I didn't know how much time had passed. I didn't know if I was still me. In my head, there was only one question left. If I was the one lying in the middle of the firing, then who was the one wearing my face? I touched my chest and felt my heartbeat weaken as if something was draining my blood, bit by bit, my soul. I trudged towards what used to be the door, praying for some miracle to open, but in front of me was a wall with the blood scribbled. It's time to finish your roll. Watch the next episode of The Face of the Nameless and The Final Price. I stood in front of the blood wall with the words, "It was time to finish your roll." My whole body was cold, as if there was no more blood in my veins. My heart was beating slowly, and I felt a part of me was being pulled away from reality. I no longer knew where I was. Was it night or day? What world was outside the room was no longer a room. It became a space, floating in motion, without gravity, with blood. Symbols revolving around me like fiery planets. I was sucked into the center and collapsed on the stone floor, feeling the whispers echoing, no longer a voice, but thousands of echoes repeating the same message. The soul is the key to open the final gate. I screamed in silence because I could no longer make a sound. All my muscles were frozen. Only my eyes were still open, seeing the black shadow gradually appearing in front of me. That entity had no face, no clear shape. Just a tall shadow. The whole body was covered in thick black smoke. Where the face should have been, there was only a deep black void, as if wanting to absorb all the light and my soul towards it. It didn't step, but floated closer, holding a long skinny hand out in front of me. A gesture that was inviting and obligatory, and I understood right away that it was a transfer ritual. I tried to step back, but my body couldn't move. Only my mind was screaming. I didn't want to be the last one. I didn't want my soul to be trapped forever. But the voice from inside my head whispered, "If not you, then someone else. If I don't end this loop, it will continue forever, like the people before Daniel, Elise, and the nameless people buried in the woods behind the house." I was forced to make a choice, either to give up my soul or let the nameless entity find another host, and the ritual started again with a new victim. The light from the symbols on the wall began to shine. The chanting echoed as if it filled my head, and at that moment I saw again the images of my parents, my friends, the faces that I thought I had forgotten. They were not clear but distorted. Like looking through water, I realized I was being erased from the world's memory bit by bit. One eye screamed in my head to refuse and fight it. I held up the pendant. It glowed one last time, bright red like fire in the cave of hell, and when I dropped it to the floor, the whole place exploded. A terrible sound like lightning struck through my skull, and then everything went dark. When I woke up, I was lying outside the house in the middle of the forest. Early morning. It was still foggy, and the house behind had disappeared, as if it had never existed. Staggered my feet, no longer feeling, but my head still echoed with the chanting, gradually fading away until I heard the sound of a car. In the distance I was saved, or at least returned to the human world, but I knew I had brought something from the other side. A part of me no longer belonged here. There was nothing in my pocket except Daniel's notebook. The pendant had turned to ash, and the last pages of the notebook were now blank with only one line of hand-scribbled words. No one left the ritual without leaving anything. I closed the notebook and looked towards the forest, where everything begins, where everything ends, and Also, where the loop waits for the next person to step in without knowing that he has been chosen for a long time. Watch the next episode of The Grave in the Forest and the Message on the Old Stone. I walked for hours along the muddy trail through the forest with only Daniel's notebook in my pocket and the faint memories of the unnameable ritual. The only thing I knew was that I needed to get as far away from there as possible, but the forest continued on, and on the trail turned sideways, as if deliberately leading me in a single direction, deeper into the cold and damp earth. Near noon, when the sun was completely covered by grey clouds, I came to a clearing in the middle of the forest, where the ground dropped slightly into a natural basin. In the middle was a large rock covered in green moss on the surface, with strange, ancient symbols engraved on it, and a rusty iron cross stuck at an angle beside it, surrounded by bouquets of flowers that had rotted for a long time. I approached and brushed the damp moss away as each line of words gradually appeared on the rock's surface in an ancient language I didn't fully understand, but there were characters that matched the symbols in the ritual book I had seen, and a phrase written 3 times by human hand: "Let it sleep." I shivered, feeling the cold spread through my spine, and some invisible eyes were watching me. I bent down to look closely at the base of the rock and noticed there was a small gap big enough to fit a notebook or letter. I pulled out Daniel's notebook, and for the first time noticed the back cover was covered with tape. I gently peeled off the tape and found a thin piece of paper. Hidden on the paper was a rough map leading from the house to the exact area I was standing next to, a line in red ink. He finally fell asleep. Watched the rock. If the blood touched the ground, the gate opened again. I felt the whole forest shake for a few seconds, as if confirming the fear rising in my heart. He sat down in front of the rock and felt a strange energy coming from below it, not a voice or sound, but a feeling of being sucked down, as if my soul was being pulled into an invisible hole underground. Everything around me suddenly became eerily quiet. Not a bird, not a wind, not a movement in space, only my heart was beating like a drum. Stood up and took a few steps back, but my foot tripped over something. Then when I looked down, I saw a small rusty iron cage, half buried in the ground. Inside were pieces of bones and a strip of black cloth. I realized this was once a place to keep a sacrifice. Someone had died here, not one, but maybe many people, over the decades before leaving. I looked back at the rock one more time and realized there was a line of words carved deeper than the rest, only appearing when the sunlight penetrated right into the forest crevice. The words were written in an ancient language and translated into English below: "Don't let him remember your name." I turned around and walked quickly away from that area, not daring to look back, but I felt like a certain gaze was still following me every step, until the forest returned to the familiar path. I didn't know why I was allowed to live, but I was sure of one thing: I had gone too deep into a part of the world that humans shouldn't touch, and now I was no longer the same person. Watch the next episode of The Faceless Men and the Sound in the Roots. I thought I had escaped, but the darkness still followed me. Every step the forest got thicker and thicker, the trees intertwined, forming a living wall separating me from the outside world. And when the sunset fell, everything was immersed in a half-red, half-purple light, as if from a dimension that did not belong to the earth. I had no direction. I could only walk by instinct and a vague whisper from deep within the ground. With each step, the tree roots rose higher and twisted like withered arms reaching out to grab my ankles. The faster I walked, the softer the ground became, like thin mud under my feet. But there was no rain, no water, just cold soil and a metallic smell. Every time I tried to stop to rest, the whispers rang out more clearly, as if urging and threatening. I heard each word clearly, as if echoing from somewhere deep below. "Look at the roots. Open your eyes, remember, and then I saw them, faceless figures standing in the middle of the forest, not moving, no sound, just figures in black standing scattered around me, forming an incomplete circle. No wind blowing, but the trees rustled as if someone was running around me. Continuously I turned to the left and saw a skinny figure with its head tilted to one shoulder. I turned to the right and saw another tall figure with arms longer than the knees. No one had a face, no one blinked. I started to back away. Then the tree roots under my feet popped up, as if someone was pulling me tight, making me fall to the cold ground. When my face was close to the ground, I heard a clearer sound than the sound of children laughing, people crying and chanting coming from under the tree roots. I used all my strength to pull my legs out and ran haphazardly towards the light. But when I rushed out of the circle of faceless figures, they all disappeared without a trace, as if they had never existed. But I knew I wasn't hallucinating, because my clothes still had mud stains and tree roots stuck around my shoes. I ran aimlessly until I collapsed next to a giant rotten tree whose roots spread out like the mouth of an ancient creature, opening wide to swallow everything. And from inside the roots, I heard the whisper was no longer vague, but a clearer voice of a woman. Help me out of here. Don't leave me in the dark. I put my ear close to the roots and saw a human eye looking straight at me from the crack in the ground, a real eye with black pupils and a look of despair. I fell back, my heart was pounding so hard, my chest felt like it was going to explode, and when I opened my eyes again, everything was gone, leaving only the dry roots and the thick layer of rotten leaves on the ground. I didn't know what was pulling me deeper into this nightmare, but I was sure the ritual hadn't ended. Maybe it had just started over again. But for a newcomer like me, I trudged on through the sleeping forest, but I knew clearly that there were hundreds of invisible eyes watching my every step. Every time I took a deep breath or stopped, I realized that the scary thing wasn't the darkness, but what was hidden inside it. And the deeper I went, the more I understood that what I had encountered was just the tip of a ritual that had lasted for generations, hidden under the name invisible and never real in the records, but engraved deep in the roots of this forest. Watch the next episode of The Fallen Talismans and the photo that should never be taken. I kept walking as if my feet no longer belonged to me. The light filtering through the trees in the forest gradually thinned out, and the fog began to thicken as if it wanted to hide something that I wasn't ready to face. I stopped to rest next to a rotten tree to check my backpack and found a strange object in my jacket pocket that I was sure I had never put in there. An old Polaroid photo that was distorted on the edge were Japanese characters blurred by water. I turned it over and saw nothing written on it, just an empty photo. I thought maybe someone had dropped it and was about to leave it behind, when behind the tree there was a rustling sound, as if someone was walking. I turned around in surprise, but there was nothing, just an empty space and a few falling leaves. I tried to ignore the feeling of unease and continued walking. Then a few steps later, I saw under my feet an ancient amulet torn in half, lying right in the middle of the trail. This amulet also had Japanese characters like the photo and was drawn in red ink that had partially spread out. Below was a child's footprint. The ground was still damp, as if someone had just walked over. I picked up the amulet and put it in my pocket with the photo, then turned around to continue. Then I heard a small giggle coming from behind. I turned around and saw no Onai. Took out my phone and quickly took a few pictures around to check through the camera, because I had heard many stories about things that couldn't be seen with the naked eye, but could be seen in the photo. When I reviewed each one, my heart was pounding. In one of the pictures behind me, it was clearly a picture of a woman with long hair covering her face, standing in the middle of a bush, holding A bloody bundle, I gasped, and quickly deleted the photo, but the phone froze, the screen turned black, and only white text appeared. No one was looking at me, but I was still able to leave. I dropped the phone because my hands started shaking violently. I didn't know what was happening, but it was clear I had accidentally activated something by picking up the photo, and taking another photo ran away from that area and kept hearing whispers in my pocket. I felt like the photo was shaking slightly. I stopped and pulled it out. The photo was shaking slightly. I continued walking through the dark paths in the forest, and suddenly before my eyes appeared a rotten wooden hut nestled between two ancient tree trunks. The door of the hut was slightly open. A faint light from inside made me both curious and afraid. I walked closer. The feeling of chills down my spine became more obvious when my hand touched the rusty metal door handle. I took a deep breath and gently pushed the door open. It creaked like a miserable groan from a dying person. Inside was a small space covered in the dust of time. Everything seemed to have been left for a long time. The tables and chairs were tilted. Cobwebs covered the corners, and in the middle of the room was a wooden table on which was an ancient square music box carved with strange patterns. The lid of the box was slightly open, as if someone had just touched me. I approached and put my hand on the music box, clearly feeling the coldness radiating from the rotten wooden surface. I opened the lid, waiting for the music to play, but nothing, just a terrifying silence. I was surprised because inside the box was empty. No gears, no springs, and no mechanism. Any mode, just a gap, as if something invisible was taken away. I was about to close it when I discovered on the opposite side of the music box was a large mirror. Hanging on the wall, the mirror was covered in dust, but still enough to see my reflection. Standing there with my hand still on the lid of the box, I raised my hand to wave, and the image in the mirror followed suit, but when I raised my head to look straight, the reflection started to shake its head, slowly, one beat at a time. Even though I was completely still, I took a few steps back, but the image in the mirror still shook its head, then stopped and tilted its head to the side, as if it wanted to say something. I turned back to look closely at the music box and discovered the bottom of the box had a circular scratch, as if something had rotated inside as suddenly. I heard footsteps behind me, turned around, but there was nothing. Then a whisper sounded from the mirror, like the wind blowing through the crack of the door. I stepped closer and looked closely. The image in the mirror was no longer me, but a child with messy hair, a blurred face, and constantly shaking its head to the rhythm, faster and faster. I wanted to run away, but my legs couldn't move, as if they were tied tightly with rope. Image. The music box vibrated once, and then made a small clicking sound, and from it came a strange sound like a whisper, mixed with the broken children's music. The melody was strangely distorted. I covered my ears, but the sound still rang in my head, and the image in the mirror disappeared. Instead, there was a black area spreading like ink on water. I grabbed the box and was about to throw it away when from the gap in the box a long black hair slithered out and fell onto the table. I threw the box on the floor, and all the light in the hut went out, leaving only the weak light from my phone. I looked into the mirror and saw behind me a tall shadow standing still, not moving. I turned around but saw nothing, then turned back to the mirror. The shadow moved closer and raised its hand to touch the mirror where my face was reflected. I screamed loudly, breaking the mirror, and rushed out of the hut, not looking back, running through the mist until my knees were bleeding and my hands were torn. I fell next to a rotten log and gasped when I looked back. The music box was in my backpack, even though I surely threw it away. I know now I not only carry memories, but also a part of my soul trapped in that object. Watch the next episode of The Cloaked Man. I was panting in the thick darkness, running and running, not knowing how far I had gone from the wooden hut, but I still couldn't escape something that was following me. The light from my phone was fading, the screen was flashing like it was being jammed. I tried to follow a small, narrow path next to a dry stream, hoping to find a way out, but at that moment, I suddenly stopped. In front of me was a person standing silently with his back to me in the middle of the path. That person was wearing a long red cloak that covered him from head to toe, fluttering slightly even though there was no wind. The air seemed to freeze. I stood still, holding my breath. The other person didn't move or make any sound. It felt like a statue, but with each passing second, I clearly felt the pressure weighing on my chest. I was about to turn around and run away, but that person slowly turned around. His face was hidden behind the darkness of his hood. Only his eyes were glowing red like two smoldering fires. The gaze wasn't looking at me, but through me, as if it wanted to burn every piece of memory. I tried not to look straight, but the feeling still could not escape. The person in red took a step towards me without making any footsteps, but the ground shook slightly each step closer, almost making the space twist, everything around darken. The trees were silent, not a rustling sound of leaves, only the sound of my heartbeat was screaming in my ears. I raised my phone, but the phone was no longer working. The screen was black, as if burned from the inside. I took a few steps back and saw under my feet were dry footprints, sunk deep into the ground. Each step of that person left scorch marks, and small smoke rose. The ground cracked as if it had undergone some ritual. I took another step back, but my back had touched the tree trunk. There was no way to escape. The person in red was now only a few meters away from me, and his eyes seemed to burn my soul brighter than ever. He raised his hand, slowly pointing towards me, not saying anything, just gesturing as if he was summoning or commanding. I felt my body pressed against the tree trunk, unable to move. My limbs were paralyzed, and in my head, a whispering sound could not be formed. Thousands of voices simultaneously pouring. No one heard, but my heart knew it was an order to follow the ritual to the end. I struggled and suddenly realized that Daniel's necklace in my pocket was emitting a soft red light. That light made the red-clothed man take a step back and put his hand up to cover my eyes. I took the opportunity to pull out the necklace and hold it straight towards him. The light flared up more fiercely, illuminating the entire forest for a few seconds, and then went out. When I opened my eyes, the red-clothed man had disappeared, leaving only a black burn mark in the shape of a foot and a faint smoke floating in the air. Knelt down to catch my breath and felt the surrounding air gradually return, but unlike before, it was heavier and dense with the smell of ashes, like from a big fire. I knew that person did not disappear, but only retreated to observe and wait for the opportunity. Next time, he did not attack, but only warned, and I understood the message. If I went any further, I would have to face not only the ritual, but also the souls that had failed before. I stood up and hid the necklace more carefully, and continued following my instincts, not daring to stop. I knew the night this is not the end, and the ritual is not over yet. There are worse things waiting for me in the Dark Watch. The next episode, the eye on the wall and the room that never closes. After the encounter with the red-cloaked man, I lost all sense of time. Day and night mixed together in a gloomy grey and endless silence. I walked until a faint light appeared from afar. It was a small wooden house deep in the forest, surrounded by moss and bare tree trunks. I didn't know why I was drawn there. I only knew that each step seemed to be guided by an invisible hand. The wooden door was unlocked. I gently pushed it open. Inside, it was dark and smelled of moldy wood that had rotted for years. I turned on my phone's flashlight and looked around. I saw a thick layer of dust everywhere. But what made me stunned was the real eye that was bulging from the wall opposite the door. It didn't blink or move, but it was clearly a living eye with a deep, black, bloodshot pupils staring at me. I stepped back, but that gaze still followed me, whether I moved left or right. I raised my hand to cover it, and a cold feeling came over me, as if my hand had passed through something that wasn't real. Material, I muttered, this can't be real. But everything was clearer than any nightmare I've ever experienced. I went deeper into the house, then a creaking sound came from the hallway leading to a room at the end of the hallway. The door to that room was slightly open, not completely not. Closed as if someone was intentionally holding it back. I walked over and gently pushed the door open, then the door was wide open. Inside, there was nothing but a bed covered with white sheets and a standing mirror placed in the corner of the room. Turned around to leave, then the door started to close by itself, but only stopped at a certain corner, as if stuck by something invisible. I used a lot of force to push, but still couldn't close. I took the broom in the room to block it, but the door slowly pushed back. I was scared, slamming it shut, and took a chair to block it, but a few minutes later, when I turned back, it was slightly open. As before, I started to feel a strange attraction from that room, not strong, but clearly existed. All the noises outside seemed to be eliminated when I stood in the room. The light from the flashlight also gradually dimmed. I turned back, looking at the wall outside. I saw the eye was still there, but now it was blinking slowly and bleeding. I screamed. Who was doing this, and why was I here? The only response was the sound of the wind whistling through the cracks in the wooden floor, and a small moan coming from under the carpet in my room. I bent down to lift the carpet and saw a small wooden hatch with a rusty latch. I couldn't open, but on the wood was engraved in black charcoal the words, "Tilted the path ends at your feet." I stood up and backed out and closed the door again, but just a few steps later, when I turned around, the door opened slightly, as if welcoming or daring me to come back. Every time the light hit the eye on the wall, I saw the image in the mirror begin to change. No longer reflecting an empty room, but a figure standing motionless, looking through the glass, straight at me. Understood that the room was not just a bedroom, but an anchor for someone's imprisoned soul, and the door that couldn't be closed was the way for the ritual to continue. Everything in this house was watching and guided me further into the depths of the mystery. I turned away and left the cabin feeling like I had been marked once again, and this time the mark was right in my eyes, because every time I closed my eyes, I saw that eye wide open in my mind, as if it had been engraved into my subconscious, and waited until I was at my weakest to invade everything. Watch the next episode of The Blind Whisperer and the Bloody Blindfold. I no longer felt the distinction between dream and reality when I left the house. With the eye on the wall, I continued to go deeper into the forest, as if being drawn to a dark center where all the laws of space and time were bent. And then I heard a strange sound, like a steady whisper, neither loud nor soft, coming from below the tree roots with each cold wind. I followed that sound unconsciously, like someone hypnotized, and then I saw him, a man sitting in the middle of a small spiral circle of stones, surrounded by scorched amulets and old tattered ropes. He wore a ragged ash-colored cloth cloak. His head was covered with a white scarf that had turned dark red. Blood was still oozing from the crease between his forehead. His mouth kept whispering prayers in a language I had never heard before, but the tone made my goosebumps rise. I intended to turn away, but my legs couldn't lift, as if being held down from the ground. The man was blindfolded, but as if he felt me standing near him, he suddenly raised his head up and asked In a hoarse voice, "Did you come to continue or end?" I was confused and had not yet reacted when he pointed at my chest. "You yourself carried." The smell of the failed ritual, I stammered and asked who he was. He just shook his head and replied that I was the one who saw things that should not be seen and now had to live in the dark to keep it from escaping. I asked what it was, and he laughed out loud, a creepy laugh, and screamed the eye between the three suns, the blood flowing backwards and the call under the toenails. Whoever opened the ritual would have to close it with his soul. Suddenly, the cloth over his eyes shook and streams of fresh blood began to flow more strongly, dyeing his entire face red. The eyes behind the cloth began to glow bright red through the cloth, as if looking straight at me. I was scared and stepped back, but he kept whispering. His hand made a strange seal in front of his chest, and each stone in the ritual circle began to burn, creating a ghostly blue flame that rotated. I felt like my head was being squeezed, and those murmuring sounds no longer rang out of my ears but rushed straight into my head, into hundreds of different voices screaming, begging, cursing, and commanding. I shouted and rushed out of the stone circle, but with every step, I saw him still sitting there, unchanged, not moving, as if the distance was torn apart. And I was running round the ritual without knowing. I stopped to catch my breath. Then he stood up for the first time. He moved, but not on his feet, but as if gliding on the grass, without making a sound as he walked towards me, his hands still forming a seal and his mouth still muttering, "You have touched the blood, opened your eyes, and seen the man in red. Now you can no longer turn around." He gave me a piece of scorched cloth, then stepped back and sat down as before, and the blood stopped dripping from his eyes. I looked at the cloth and saw a symbol, like the talisman I had picked up before, and the handwritten words in charcoal ended with a price that only the chosen one could read. And now I understood why. Everything that had brought me here, each person, each soul, each step, was arranged as a journey of redemption or a slow execution for the one who interrupted the ritual. I walked away, but still heard whispers followed every step, and when I looked back, he was no longer there. Only the white cloth covered in blood was lying in the middle of the stone circle, smoldering as if something had just happened. I put the cloth in my pocket and knew that I had just brought another part of the curse into this body watch. The next episode: basement corridor and voices in the walls. I walked on in the forest until my legs were numb, as if I had no feeling, and in front of me appeared an old brick house buried deep in the ground, with only part of the roof exposed and a staircase leading down. I knew this was the final place where everything began and had to end here. I put my hand on the rusty basement door and gently pushed each hinge. The sound of it creaking like a cry echoed through the dark space. It was so cold inside that my breath turned into smoke. I used a flashlight to look around and saw that the basement walls were covered with ancient writing that was almost completely faded. The traces of hand-drawn drawings in dark blood were still clearly visible. Under my feet was a broken ritual circle with only a curved part left touching the wall. I continued walking when I suddenly heard a small voice coming from behind me. I turned around and saw no one. Then there was a murmur, like someone was reciting prayers. I turned the light around and stopped when I saw from the left wall a real human face bulging out, eyes wide open, mouth moving continuously. I stepped back, and from the walls other faces also began to appear. Some with intact eyes, some with deep black holes, all of them whispering my name in unison, Chris, 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 each time becoming clearer, as if the wall knew who I was and was calling me to continue the unfinished ritual. I pulled out the last amulet and held it up in front of me. All the faces simultaneously fell silent for a few seconds before opening their mouths and screaming. The scream reverberated in my head, causing me to fall to my knees, my ears ringing, and in my eyes were dozens of twisted, distorted faces crying, laughing, and groaning. I knew I had to go to the end of the hallway where the last large wooden door was waiting. I stepped forward, put my hand on the door latch, and felt a warm stream of blood from inside flow through the crack of the door, seeping into my hand. I opened the door and entered, trembling. The room inside was a circular space with grey stone walls, and the floor was the final ritual circle. The dim light shone from the candles placed evenly around the perimeter. I recognized the figure of a person in red standing in the middle of the ritual circle, holding an object in his hand. Something glistened like a blade. He didn't look at me, but spoke. In a deep voice, "You have all the pieces you are. The end or the successor." I pulled out the piece of cloth. The blind man's blood gave me an Daniel's necklace and the first photo, and threw them all into the middle of the ritual circle. The candle flame flared up green, and the circle began to rotate counterclockwise. The man in red raised his face for the first time, revealing his face, a combination of faces I had seen on the walls and in the basement. He screamed, and his body dissolved into black smoke that spread around. The fire that engulfed everything. Woke up outside the house at dawn. My body ached, but the objects were gone. I knew I had survived, but I didn't know what was left inside me, because in my ears I could still hear the whispers, "Chris, Chris, Chris," even though I had left the woods a long time ago. My story ends here. But for anyone watching this video, remember, if you see an Airbnb that is too cheap, too deserted, and has too many strange symbols, consider carefully, because maybe the ritual never ended. It's just waiting for you. Come and start over. Thanks for following the whole journey. Subscribe to the Reddit Mystery channel so you don't miss the next horror stories.